When you're picking songs for your wedding ceremony, how many songs should you pick and what type of music should you choose? Well, the good news is you got lots of options. If you do it right, the music you pick for your wedding ceremony can really kind of set the mood and the vibe for the entire rest of your wedding day. But I find a lot of couples getting stuck on 1, how many songs you actually play during your ceremony, and 2, what songs to pick. So let's start off with the first part on how many songs you should normally play during a wedding ceremony. Most wedding ceremonies you attend have 4 parts to them. First being the prelude music, and that's the music you play as guests are arriving. Second is the processional, which plays while the bridal party's walking down the aisle, usually the groom, parents, things like that. Third is the song that plays while the bride is walking down the aisle, sometimes escorted by a family member and sometimes by herself. And then finally, after the bride and groom are married, you play the recessional, they walk back down the aisle, and everybody celebrates. Now, of course, you can throw more songs in there, but that's the typical traditional way of doing a wedding ceremony. But like I always say, traditions are ideas made up by dead people, and they're all dead, so do whatever you want. And even though ceremonies seem like a more intimate traditional affair, you can still do something a little fun and different to kind of fit, again, your vibe and your mood for your wedding. Now, some couples will opt to have a song for each member of the bridal party. Maybe each bridesmaid and groomsman gets a song as they walk down the aisle. I usually advise against that because even if you're a really good DJ or hire a really good mixer or sound coordinator, it can get really sloppy mixing all these songs in and out. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I always suggest to kind of keep it simple. So again, just my recommendation, I would have a playlist of music for the prelude, 1 song for the processional, 1 song for the bride, and then 1 song for the recessional as the bride and groom walk back down the aisle. So we've got that out of the way, but now what songs do you pick? And again, it's your wedding. You can do literally whatever you want, but I'll give you kind of, my 2 cents on what most couples do and what I think works best. So starting with the prelude, again, that's the music that's playing as your guests are arriving to the ceremony, saying hello, greeting each other, and sitting down waiting for the ceremony to start. And most couples will opt for like your typical classical music, Bach, Beethoven, Handel, Vivaldi, things like that. But I've had couples play country music, classic rock, hip hop, even some house and techno vibes. Again, it's your wedding, it's your ceremony, do whatever you want. If you're kind of an eclectic couple and want something different, you really can play whatever you want here. Just make sure it's something that fits the vibe of the two of you. I'm super nerdy, so for my wife and I's wedding, I actually chose some classical covers of music from one of my favorite video games, Final Fantasy IV, and I thought it sounded perfect. Now, once the processional starts, some couples will opt to have a new song playing or like a custom song for their group, or some couples will have the music that was playing during the prelude continue into the processional. Either one works totally fine. No one's going to sit there and say, wait a second, people are walking down the aisle, but the song didn't change. This makes no sense and I'm going crazy. They won't say that. It's really not a big deal. A couple really cool groups I recommend for your processional music are Vitamin String Quartet and 2 Cellos. And these groups, what they do is they take modern songs, like songs from Ed Sheeran, Sam Smith, even like Kendrick Lamar, and they cover them to sound like classical music. So you kind of get both of that modern vibe, but like the classical traditional feel. And every time I play them at a ceremony, guests always walk up and ask, who is that group? Who made that? Did you do that? I'm like, no, I definitely don't play cello. And I tell them what groups they are, and they get super excited and surprised because they want to use them at their wedding. But if you want to do something a little bit more upbeat and fun, you can always go to a classic like Chris Brown Forever, made famous, of course, by The Office.
Hey, Peter, did you see this? It was on YouTube.
Saw it.
Any modern Bruno Mars song works, songs like that. And if you want to go a little bit more low key, but still modern, any of the new Taylor Swift cabin core records all work really, really well during a wedding ceremony. Now for the big moment, the bride's grand entrance into the ceremony. I think for most couples, they're still opting to use some form of Here Comes the Bride, which is the classic traditional wedding song for a bride walking down the aisle. And that's totally fine, but I always encourage brides and grooms to think of something a little bit more you. I've had brides walk down the aisle to Summer Over the Rainbow, the cover by Israel Kamuka Viole, countless different versions of Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, even songs like Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, November Rain by Guns N' Roses, and pretty much any slow country song ever all work for a bride walking down the aisle. But again, if you want to go very traditional and classical, Here Comes the Bride is always a solid option. Now, if you're going to have live performers doing the music for your ceremony, just make sure they know the songs you want really, really well, and they don't do something like this. And yes, this is absolutely real.
Hey, you're crazy bitch, but you so good I'm on top of it when I dream.
So now for the fun part. You're married, you're gonna walk back down the aisle to your recessional. What song do you pick? Here you can go pretty wild and pick almost any song you want. Again, some couples will opt for a more classical piece, but I'd encourage you to find a fun song that's upbeat to kind of set the vibe for your wedding. So guests know, wow, if the ceremony was this hype, imagine what the reception's gonna be like. So if it's a theme song from one of your favorite TV shows, or a Disney song, or a song from a movie, or it could be a song by the Beastie Boys, it really doesn't matter. Whatever song just kind of screams you and your partner, you're totally allowed to play that during your ceremony, even though it may not be like the typical classic traditional ceremony songs. No one's going to remember if you walk back down the aisle to Beethoven, but if you play something a little out there, they're going to remember that. So for your entire ceremony, from the prelude to the recessional, pick songs that you and your partner vibe to that set the mood for the entire rest of your wedding. That's really where it starts, right there. On next week's episode, we're going to talk about how to choose music for your cocktail hour and for dinner service. Again, it does go along with setting the vibe for your wedding, but there's a lot of different options and a lot of different choices to set the mood during cocktail hour and during dinner at your wedding. Because planning a wedding can be a lot, but you shouldn't get stuck on those little details. Just cut the fucking cake.